Hey! In this video I'm pleased to announce that Microthemer now supports deep integration with Gutenberg. For those of you that don't know about Microthemer, it's a visual CSS editor that can be used to style any kind of WordPress content, regardless of which theme, builder or plugin was used to generate it. So what does deep integration mean exactly? Well, traditionally the way to add custom CSS to blocks with Microthemer was to load the front-end page and then style elements with point and click. That's the standard way to work in the absence of any specific integration, and you can still work that way if you prefer, but now, if we go to the Gutenberg editor side, we can style blocks at exactly the same time as adding content. So, for instance, if I add a block quote, I can instantly style it at the same time using Microthemer. So I'm just going to add a little bit of box shadow, and then turn down the opacity, and then maybe increase the margin by a little bit as well. And I can use this slider to add a value in, say, pixels or rem values, like so. Or I can also look at the site variables. So Microthemer has this option here, site variables, which if we expand it, we can choose some of WordPress's variables. So I could say choose this one, and then I've got some consistent spacing between my elements. And by the way, if you want to just see how the element looks without the highlighting enabled, just use this option here. And the fact that we can do all this from a single browser tab creates a nice workflow when you're developing your initial content for the page, and you can also add styling. And it also means that the styling will be consistent between the editor and the front end. So if we just quickly go to the front end and scroll down, you can see that we've got our quote with Microthemer's styling already applied. Microthemer delivers a couple of benefits over using Gutenberg CSS styling options, and another set of benefits over using a typical desktop code editor to make changes to theme style sheets directly. Let's start with the advantages it has over using Gutenberg CSS controls. One of the main benefits is that you can use Microthemer to add responsive styling for mobile and tablet devices. So for instance, these tables look okay at kind of around up to about 768 pixels, but down on mobile they're starting to look a little bit squashed, and they start to look a little bit squashed around basically up to here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to this tab here, which will apply our styling only to screen sizes below 768 pixels. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make these tables responsive. So what I'm going to do first is select this table cell here, and then move up to the table row, which is the element that holds these three columns. And then I'm going to increase my targeting, broaden it so that it targets all of the table rows on the page. So this number 17 just means it's going to target 17 elements, and that's how many rows. You can see from the green targeting that's exactly how many rows we've got with these three tables in total. So with these elements selected, I'm going to go to Microthemer's CSS grid properties, and I'm just going to adjust the layout of things. You've just got these drag and drop controls here, so I can just drag this over to two columns. Once I release that, it's going to adjust the layout, so we've now got a two-column grid instead of a table row with three table cells. And what I can also do is just drag this first table cell to make sure that it spans both of the rows so it can act as a heading. And then I'm going to just align the content to be centered so it's a little bit easier to read. And then to make it a bit clearer, the first table cell is going to act as a heading. I'm going to increase my targeting to all of the table data in all of the rows, so that's 17 again. I'm going to save my selector. If I was just before I was just adding a property which has the same effect as saving the selector, but you can also click that button, and if I want to just remove the highlighting so I can see things a bit more clearly, I can use this option here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make the font weight bold, like so. I'm going to add a little bit of spacing at the top here, and I could use this option here maybe, just one of my presets. And then I don't think it needs a border anymore, so I'm certainly not that top border, so let's set that to 0. And actually we probably want to set them all to 0, so if I can use this chain icon here, that will set all of the border fields at the same time. And then that's now looking quite nice. And we can drag this top ruler here just to see how that's going to respond to smaller screens, and it still looks nice and readable. But if we just move beyond that breakpoint that we added at 768 pixels, so if we're moving past here, then we can see that on larger screens we've still got our usual 3-column table. So another benefit of using Microtheme is that we can style blocks, multiple blocks on a given page in one go. So with Gutenberg, if I were to say select this heading here, this heading 3, and by the way I've docked these, the block options, which are sometimes by default they're displayed as a popover just next to the block when you select it. I displayed them on the top just because I find that even when I'm not editing with Microthemer, they kind of get in the way a bit. I prefer this layout. But specifically with Microthemer, with targeting mode enabled here, which means we're able to select elements for styling with Microthemer. With this disabled, we're just working with Gutenberg in exactly the normal way. But with this option enabled, Microthemer will actually hide this popover because it gets in the way so frequently. So if you want to have it displaying even though you've got targeting mode enabled, I think it's a really good idea to dock these options to the top. And the way to enable this alternative layout in WordPress is to go down to the Preferences and then the Appearance, and then to make sure that this top toolbar option here is checked. But going back to what I was saying about the heading, if I wanted to say center this heading, I could do so one at a time by clicking this Align Text option here, and then I'd have to, if I wanted the same styling to apply to this block, I'd have to repeat that again by clicking on this and clicking the alignment button again. So Microtheme can save us some time here. So again, I'm going to expand my targeting to all of the blocks. So that's all 3 of them, and then you can see that they've all got green. And then if I just go to the alignment options and just set text align to center, then they've all center aligned. So it makes your styling much more maintainable. Another advantage of using Microthemer to style elements is that we can style everything. So here, if I add a citation, we have some options for styling this block quote, but we can't style the individual citation. We can, for instance, align it separately because it's quite a common design pattern to align the author or the testimonial person to the right. So we have a bit more control. So with Microthemer, I have a saying that if you can see it, you can style it. Whereas with Gutenberg and certain page builders, often depending on what content you're working with, you've got only a curated set of styling options that change depending on what kind of content you're working with. Whereas with Microthemer, you've got this full set of options, and you can style, you can go down to like the subcomponents within a block and make whatever style changes you want. Oh, and I should remind you that whenever you've finished adding styles via this Media Query tab, which is just directed to a specific screen size, you need to remember to go back to the All Devices tab. And that's just so that any additional styles you add will apply to all screen sizes. So if you make a mistake like I've done with this citation, which should probably be right-aligned for all devices, the quickest way to move your styles is actually to go to the code editor. Now, I've only got one style value here, but if you had a few, you would select them all, cut them, then just go to the All Devices tab and then paste it in here. From there you can always adjust the styles using the visual controls, but for moving them, doing a bit of cutting and paste on the code editor can save you some time deleting styles and then re-adding them on the correct responsive tab. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the main benefits of Microthemer is you've got all of these CSS styling options no matter what you're targeting. So to give you a demonstration of that, I'm just going to add a button to the page and add some text and then save that. And then I'm going to start off by increasing the padding to make it quite a bit bigger. And by the way, when it comes to where you should add the styles, it's totally up to you if you want to, say, use Gutenberg to increase the width of things, like use the Gutenberg CSS controls where there's an option available, and then just use Microthemer to fill in the gaps, or just use Microthemer for all of the styling. I know people that use both. If it was me, I would probably use the global CSS styling controls to set variable colors and things like that in Gutenberg, and then I would use Microthemer just for everything else. So I wouldn't use the width settings here, I would just use the width settings in Microthemer. But like I say, it's up to you. And so the reason I've given this button lots of padding is that we're going to go to the shapes and masks option, and I'm going to find a pebble. So we've got lots of like stock kind of shapes here. And I'm going to choose this one here, and then I'm going to set it to not repeat, and I'm going to position it in the center and make the font size a little bit bigger. Let's try large, yeah. And then in order to center it in the page, what I'm going to do is I'm going to just target the, these are the parent elements, I'm going to target this element here, and I'm just going to set the margin right and left to auto. Okay, and that centers that nicely now. And also let's give it a little bit more space below the block quote. So let's go to set the top margin to 40. Let's turn off the highlighting so I can see if that, yeah, that looks about right. And just to show off another advanced styling option, let's just give it a simple animation. I'm going to give it a pulse. And we can also set that to happen, by default it's when the page first loads, but because this is quite far down, the user might not see the animation then, so we'll say when it comes into view, and I'm just going to increase the length of this to maybe 2 seconds, and let's see what happens when this comes down. Yeah, so it just gives a nice, every time the user scrolls, it just jumps out of view, making the call to action a bit stronger. And another advantage of using Microthemer over Gutenberg styling options is that you can switch between the code and the UI options whenever you like, and they're interchangeable. So I've just noticed that we probably need to add a bit more padding to our element here. So I'm going to go to the padding options, and I'm just going to increase that a little bit because we weren't viewing it at full screen earlier because we had some sidebars expanded. So here I've increased the padding a little bit, but I could just as easily change this value to say 5.6 here, and then switch back to the visual options, and then do the using the slider to make both fine-tune adjustments. And I can also target elements in the hover state with Microthemer. So when we hover over this button here, it goes kind of grey. To create a hover selector, the easiest way is to go to, when you've already got a selector enabled, is to create a variation of it. So I can go hover and then save that. Now I've got hover selector. Another way to do it is to, when you're first creating a selector, so say I click on this, I could choose an option here, and I've got all sorts of different options here. I could choose hover as just one of them. I've got plenty. But going back to our hover selector that we created, I could set I'm just going to turn off the highlighting. I could set the background color to be grey, and then that's even lighter. And then I can actually use, to switch between the two, I could use this jump shortcut as well. That allows me to go directly to the visual option for a specific line of code, and then now I've made it kind of a bit more subtle. Or I could choose. So remember, we've got Microthemer samples the variables used, so we can see all these color variables that WordPress uses. I could choose a really bold orange if I wanted the button to really stand out when you hover over it. And the final advantage I want to cover about using Microthemer over Gutenberg CSS styling options is the fact that Microthemer will organize our CSS selectors into folders. It does this automatically as long as you've got this auto folder option enabled here. And what it will do is, so by default, because I've got this page option selected here, I could have chosen the global option to add global styles, but I've got this page option enabled, which means Microthemer will automatically add my CSS styling to page-specific folders. And the reason it's created two page-specific folders here is that one is for below the fold content. So what it's decided, the selectors up here, which target like the heading, the tables, the quote, but the content inside the quote. This is obviously where Microthemer has deemed the the fold threshold to be is just here. It's organized into another folder called which is labeled below the fold, and what that means is that all of these CSS styles will load asynchronously, so they will not contribute to the initial load time of the page. They will load when the browser is ready to load them after other content. And the thinking behind that is that all of the content here, even on a large screen, all of this might be visible straight away, and so it should be styled exactly how it's meant to be straight away. But this is likely to be, the text in this block quote is likely to be invisible below the user's screen, requiring some scrolling in order to view straight away, and so that can be styled a little bit later. And while I'm on the subject, you can actually, if you go to preferences, you can adjust the threshold for where the below the fold is. Microthemer chooses quite a conservative one to cater for big screens, but you might choose slightly lower, like say 900 pixels, and then more of your styles are going to load in this below the fold folder, which means that they won't contribute to the load time of the page. So now let's move on to the advantages Microthemer has over styling theme files directly with a code editor like Visual Studio Code. So this is where you're editing style sheets directly, either using Sass or just plain CSS files, and then you're uploading them to your server with FTP when they're ready the changes are ready to go live. So one of the benefits of using Microthemer over that workflow is that you've got the consistent styling. So although you could on-queue your CSS style sheets on the admin side where I've got this block editor, it's quite tricky to make styles apply to this content area here, but not also the wider admin area, so you might end up messing up your buttons if you're unfortunate with the CSS styling that you're applying. The way I solved that with Microthemer was fiddling around with some JavaScript functions where I would temporarily disable the styles over here and then enable them once the little iframe content area is loaded, but it's quite fiddly and it's probably not something you would spend time doing if you're just focusing on building client sites. The other advantage, which is similar to this below the fold optimization, is that Microthemer organizes your folders into your styles into folders that only load on specific pages, and so Microthemer generates these conditions for you automatically, although they're completely customizable, where Microthemer will load it on a specific page, or if say you wanted to add another page, so I wanted it to load on a services page as well, I could use this all condition and easily tweak the rules for how assets load on certain pages. And there's a lot of flexibility here, and there's a list of all of the different conditions that you've got at your disposal here. And if you click on any of these, you'll go to some documentation, or this page. Here we've got some custom, these are WordPress functions that you might be familiar with. These are some custom ones I've added in Microthemer that you can use. And it basically all just means that you can be very precise in where your assets load, without having to spend lots of time writing custom logic and splitting your CSS up into different files on the server. Another advantage of Microthemer, of course, is it's a live CSS editor, so you're seeing your CSS changes immediately on the live site. You don't have to do any FTP uploading, and you can work on a live site and you don't have to worry about your styles appearing to site visitors, because until you click this publish button, everything you do in Microthemer is only visible to you as a logged-in administrator. And that also goes for if you've enabled Sass editing. So Sass is a CSS preprocessor language which allows you to do things that you can't do with CSS by itself. Microthemer supports this, although it's not enabled by default, so you need to go to your preferences and enable this option here. And that happens very, very quickly. I've written an article on CSS tricks, which explains the specific Sass compilation optimization that Microthemer uses, where it basically compiles only very small amounts of Sass code in one go, so it can the style changes can appear on screen immediately. So another thing that Microthemer does to ensure that the styling is consistent between the editor and the site front end is that it adds classes to blocks whenever you select them. As long as you've got targeting mode active and then you click on any block to select it, what Microthemer will do is add a little unique class in the additional classes field. And let me just reduce this, we've got a bit more room to see. what this class does is it provides some stability so that you can target blocks with some CSS code, and even if you change the order of the blocks, the CSS styles will still apply to the same block. Because you see, Gutenberg's actually very clean in the way that it outputs HTML code. It doesn't add very many classes or IDs to the content. But that means if you want to style an individual block, you sometimes need to use, and Microthemer does this for you, but it sometimes needs to use what are called ordinal CSS selectors. So let's see if I just expand this, let's see if I can get one. Yeah, so this is an ordinal one where it says nth of type, so it means this is the first paragraph within its container. And so if you move things around, then your CSS might apply to the wrong element. But by having these unique classes, it means that when we apply some styling, so I could just, let's see, I'll just make this first paragraph italic. Then Microthemer has used that class that it was added automatically to this little field here in the CSS, and then that will display on the front end as well, and then the styling will be exactly the same in both contexts. And so if I switch between, you can see that this paragraph keeps its class. This heading here, the class changes every time I click on it, because we're not using a unique class that Microthemer has added to style it. We're actually targeting this heading and the other two headings on the page, just using a regular WP block heading class. So Microthemer does clear up, so basically because we click off it, changes the class because it gets rid of it once we move away, and then it just gives you a new unique class when you go back to it. So you don't have to, if you're not making use of these classes, you don't have to manually delete them yourself. Microthemer will clean up after itself there. But these classes are basically what enables you to style content in the editor in exactly the same way as the front end, even though the HTML in the editor is actually quite different from the final rendered HTML on the front end. And without this unique, this automatic system of adding unique classes, getting styles to be consistent by manually adding these classes would be quite a lot of work. Another little feature Microthemer provides is that as you click around on things, you'll notice it scrolls the class, as long as you're on the block panel here, it will expand this advanced area automatically and scroll this additional classes field into view. That's just a little feature that makes it easier to add classes. If you're used to working with page builders, you might find it a bit frustrating that Gutenberg, you have to dig around and scroll and click in order to get to these custom classes. And particularly if you're working with a framework like Tailwind, a CSS utility framework, where you're regularly adding classes as a way of styling your content, this should save you a fair bit of time. And just one final point about these unique classes. If you're working on the front end, so if you're styling this page not inside the block editor, but just loading the regular front end page, Microthemer can't insert these classes automatically when you click on blocks. So one workaround for that, if it's your preferred workflow is to work on the front end page, you can go to Preferences, let's see, and then choose Enable this option. Okay, it's not enabled by default, but this means that basically Microthemer will add unique classes to all of your blocks, even if you're working outside of Microthemer. And so when you come to load a front end page, every block will have a class. The downside of this, of course, is that there'll be some redundant classes. Your markup won't be quite as clean as Gutenberg content normally is on the front end, so it'll be a bit closer to what page builders do. Page builders often add a unique class to each module as well. So that's up to you to decide there. And while we're on the subject of preferences, if you're upgrading from Microthemer a version previous to 7.3, then it used to be that this option here, support admin area style loading, used to be set to no by default. It's now set to yes, but if you're upgrading from an older version, you might need to manually set this to yes in order to be able to work with Gutenberg and style the blocks at the same time, just as you've seen in this video. Okay, for the second part of this tutorial, I'd just like to give you a quick explainer on the site editor, which is also sometimes called the full site editor. And that's available on modern block themes. I'm using 2024 in this case, and you'll have this option in the appearance menu. So if I click that, I go through to this page here, which by default we're looking at the home page, but we've got options for navigating between the different kinds of content that make up the site. So let's start with navigation. I'm going to click this option here, and then I can choose this navigation here, which basically relates to the main menu. And here we're viewing the main menu by itself. And to start with Microthemer, I can just click anywhere on the page to load up the Gutenberg editor, and then so I can click on this link and then expand my targeting to all of them, and then I'll just make a color change, something obvious like this orange variable color here that's used in the theme. And then if I go back, we can use this WordPress icon to go back, and then click this just to go back to the view our homepage, and you can see that our styling applies here too. And that's because Microthemer placed our CSS selector in the folder here called navigation, and because we've got this auto folder option checked, it automatically added some logic to say that this will display whenever there's some content that has this template WP navigation with an ID of 4. And so because our header uses that, then it will display wherever our header displays. Just quickly on the folders that are available when you first install Microthemer by default are these folders here, and the fact that they're solid means that they're global, which means they will, any styles you add to these folders will display on every page of your site. And so for something like navigation, we could actually just drag this into our header folder here, and then we just know that that's going to apply globally. But Microthemer is always trying to optimize your asset loading, so it's only loaded where needed. And so for other types of content, like say we're going to move on to templates and patterns later, sometimes a pattern might only display on say 2 or 3 pages. So the CSS will only load on those 2 or 3 pages, not on every single page of your site. And that just stops you from having just too many global styles that are just adding unnecessary weight to your page. So now let's move on to the styles. And what this does is it basically gives you some pre-made styles, so typography and colors and things like that, for you that you can just set very easily with a click. And if we save this, these styles, this will affect now all pages of the whole site. It will now have this dark theme. And you can customize things using this option here, and you can change things like colors and typography, so you can use your own color scheme. And I think it's a good idea, even if you're using Microthemer, to set the global colors and color variables using this global styles feature within Gutenberg, and then you can always make on per page or per block customizations using Microthemer. Okay, so now let's move on to pages. So for most of this video we've just been working on this page here, and the workflow when you're using the site editor is very similar to what we've seen before. The difference is we just need to, before we can select things for styling, we just need to click at least once on the body area of the page. But one very useful addition is this navigation option up here. So if we click on here, we can jump between pages. So I could go to my services page just with one click, or we could jump between, so let's go to navigation. Yep, that navigation. So now let's move on to templates. So templates define the overall structure of the page. Okay, so normally when you're editing a post or a page, you're essentially working on just this inner content bit here. You're not dealing with the header and the footer. But the template defines the structure of the page that the individual page content is going to be displayed within. And the 2024 theme has various templates for different kinds of content. So an archive template, blog template, 404 template, but mostly you're probably working with the page templates. So this full page with no title template is useful if you want to create a completely custom sort of full width bleed page, and say you might want the heading 1 to appear in a slightly different place to the usual place that it displays in, which is just above or below the featured image if there is one. There's also a page with a sidebar template, so that's useful for that's kind of blog post page you might have, or maybe a docs section of your site, and you might have the sidebar either on the right or the left. And the nice thing is that they're completely customizable. So if I just click on this page to bring up the editor, I've got my structure panel here, where I can dig down into the various types of content. And let's see, this is my sidebar. And if I just wanted to delete something, let's say I wanted to delete the categories, I could just delete that and also delete the separator. And then so you can play around with the content however you like. And in terms of styling things with Microthemer, I'll just give you a quick example. So if I select this heading here, and by the way, the selectors that Microthemer generates up here, they're completely customizable. So you can either open up the advanced options here, which I often do, or you've got the option here, which sometimes if you're short on space, you might just use this option. And you've also got the option on the top. The difference here isn't quite so apparent. Let me just select something else, a paragraph. Okay, so normally when you select something, you've got options for targeting just this single paragraph, or lots of other ones. So I could target 2 paragraphs, 3 paragraphs, etc. by using these different options here. But going back to the heading, I only need to target this single heading, but I might actually want to change the CSS selector that Microthemer has suggested by default, because has extra large font size is a class that might be applied to various elements on the site. So you might look for something that seems a bit more uniquely descriptive of what this is, and in this case, blog post title sounds like a good one. So now we're using this up here. I can click save. You can see that that's going to be the code if we were to enter some custom code here. But I'll just go and I'll set the font color just to this orange value that we're using. And what we're also going to do is actually move our selector into a different folder. So you see how it's added this post title to my navigation folder. Now it's done that because Microthemer just will keep adding selectors even with this auto folders enabled. It will keep adding new CSS selectors to the current folder as long as the current folder loads on the specific page we're working on. Because our navigation is going to load wherever, or basically on every page of the site, because there's always going to be navigation at the top. It's just popped that in there, but that's not really what we want, because we actually just want to style this specific template. So when you need to move your selector targeting into a different folder, you don't have to delete it and start again. You can use this option here where it says retarget current selector. And now we can choose to place it in a different folder. So we've got this option down here in the auto folder thing. We've got template, page with sidebar. Let's just select this option here and then update that. So now if we look at our folder list, we've got this new folder where our selector is. So it was in this folder. And by the way, you can just move things around like this, but it's now in this new folder here. So let's now go to our page that we've been working on so far, the Gutenberg page. And we'll see that because this this page is not using the template we were just working on with the sidebar, our selector now is kind of highlighted in grey, because we're still on our selector for the post title, but it's just showing, hey, it's not loading on this page. To make that happen, we can change the template. So this is where once you've defined your layout using templates, you can, on a specific page, say, okay, I want to swap my template for that sidebar one that I was using. Where is it? Page with sidebar, this one here. And then now we can see that our style that's applying to any page that uses this template is going to display on this page here. Okay, so now let's move on to patterns. Go back to that's the final option here. So patterns are useful for basically when you want to insert a group of related blocks and maybe you want to reuse them, or you just want to, in this case, 2024 comes with a whole bunch of kind of pre-made designs for you. And so there's 2 different ways you can insert them into your pages. You can either synchronize them, or you can just keep them as kind of loose blocks that you customize individually on each individual page. So for example, we've got among this list of potential patterns we've got this hero one. Or a project description one, actually. Let's just use this. So this lock sign basically means you need to duplicate it to make use of it. In short, it just means WordPress doesn't want you to directly edit the source pattern. It wants you to create your own copy of it. And I recommend always using the sync option, okay? Because you can always, if you want an unsynced variation, you can always just create another duplicate. But if you have what synced means is that whenever you insert this say if you insert it on multiple pages, then it's going to appear in exactly the same way. So if you were to change, say, styling of something using Microthemer, or even some of the content aspects, then those content changes will update on every single instance of this pattern across all of the different pages that use it. So let's make just one content change to the text to I'm going to say really enhance. And then I'm going to, let's say, with Microthemer, I'm just going to add a border image. Okay, so border 5 pixels solid white. I can add a white border to that. Let's turn off this highlighting so I can see this here. And then I'm also going to collapse this HTML area here so we've got a bit more room. Save this, and then let's use the navigator to go to, say, the services page. And I'm just going to insert this. And you go to patterns, and then my patterns, and I'm going to insert this project description here. And now that appears down here, and it's got the word really and enhance. And then if I just jump to, say, another page, let's just go to, I created one called newsletter. Yeah. And I'm just going to add that same pattern. Here we go. And we've got the same styling of the white border around the image and the emboldened word in the text. So let's close this panel now. And if we want to edit this pattern, we can choose Edit Original, and then we could make some more changes. So I'm going to change this word now to massively. Whoops. Save my changes, and then if we go to the services page, then we can see that our text is updated to massively, and if we go to the newsletter page, then it also says massively. So this just means that we can control our styles and our content for a set of content on our site in one place and have it update in multiple places, and so it's a much more efficient way to work. So that concludes my quick tour of the full site editor. For those of you that have typically used page builders, I hope this has piqued your interest a little bit in terms of what you can do just using native WordPress content editing nowadays. I'm just going to switch back to the original template we had, which I think was this one, and then go through some of the recap on some of the benefits of using Microthemer in addition to Gutenberg for styling. So one of the main benefits is responsive styling, because Gutenberg doesn't have any responsive controls, so certainly for things like tables, you can't really use like fluid units to make the content react nicely without using media queries. So really there are occasions where there's no really real option but to add media queries, and the nice thing about doing that with Microthemer is that you can make the content responsive on the front end, and then you can view it in the editor in exactly the same way. There's also the fact that you can style multiple blocks in one place, so we centered all these headings on mobile, whereas in Gutenberg you would need to repeat that for each individual block on the page. The visual styling options, there's just a lot more here than there is with Gutenberg, some of which are fairly advanced, like adding CSS shapes and masks or animations, as we did with the this button here. And there's the fact that you can switch between the code editor or the UI freely, and changing one will update the other. We've also seen that Microthemer is very flexible in the way that you can load assets using the logic that you apply to folders. And also, if you have the autofold option enabled, it will optimize your assets so that any CSS that doesn't need to load when the page first loads will load below the fold without impacting on your site speed in any way. In terms of comparing Microthemer to the workflow you'd have with a desktop editor, having consistent styles between the editor and the front end is definitely a plus, and that would be quite fiddly to do manually. We've already talked about the optimized asset loading, which is also, although it's possible with a custom solution, it just saves you time using Microthemer. And another thing that saves you time is the fact that Microthemer will add classes to blocks, so it's much easier to target them without having to add your own custom classes. But if you do want to add your own custom classes, Microthemer puts the custom class field in the block panel right into view whenever you click on a block. And just to recap on the terminology used for the various components of the site editor, so the navigation is used for things like main menus or footer menus that apply globally across your site. And when using Microthemer, it's best to apply the styles when editing the navigation menu items by themselves. The styles was a way to add global styling to your site, and I recommended using that to set the initial branding colors and spacing, etc., and then use Microthemer to make individual style changes. Pages we're familiar with from the typical edit post or edit page options in the WordPress dashboard, but we now have a handy way of navigating between pages as well as all of the other kinds of components in the site editor. Templates provide a handy way of creating specific layouts that can be reused across different pages. And again, when you're applying styling with Microthemer to those templates, it's best to add the styling on the individual template rather than an individual page, because you want the styling to follow the template wherever you happen to apply it. And patterns are a way of grouping blocks together that you're going to use within the content of various pages. And just like with templates, when you're styling them with Microthemer, it's best to apply styles when you're viewing the pattern by itself rather than an instance of the pattern on a specific page, because otherwise your styles will only apply to that one page and not all of the pages using that pattern. Of course, sometimes you want that, and that's when you might choose to deliberately apply the styles on a single page to, say, override some styling either that just comes with the pattern by itself or some general pattern styling you've applied with Microthemer. So I hope this tutorial's been helpful and possibly piqued your interest in Microthemer and maybe even the site editor if you haven't used that so far and mainly stuck with page builders. Just to finish, I want to say one more thing about using Microthemer. If you're a developer and you build sites for clients, you might want to use this option here where you can copy and paste some code to your themes functions.php file, and it will load Microthemer's assets, and then you can just go ahead and completely uninstall Microthemer. So the assets, when you uninstall Microthemer, unless you choose this option here to delete everything, then all of your styles and CSS files and information in the database will remain in place. And so you can just use this code to manually load the assets so that clients don't accidentally stumble across Microthemer and make changes that are maybe a bad idea or break something. And alternatively, if you're using something like Oxygen Builder, which doesn't actually even load a theme, or for just convenience, you can just download a simple plugin which will load Microthemer assets for you. It basically just runs this code up here, but in the form of a plugin. I think that just about wraps up this video, so if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thank you very much for watching.